I hadn't been home in over 2 years. The house looked smaller than I remembered, still wrapped in its quiet, countryside charm, where every creaky floorboard had a memory tied to it. I was visiting for my mother's birthday. My husband, as expected, couldn't make it. Too much work, he had said with a half-hearted kiss on my forehead, eyes glued to his laptop. That kiss had lingered more like a habit than affection. I told myself I didn't mind, but I did. Stepping into the living room, I was met with the warm smell of cinnamon and wood polish and the sound of soft laughter from the kitchen. And then I saw him, Daniel, my stepbrother. It took a moment to register the man in front of me. Taller than I remembered, broader, and somehow even more self-assured. He turned, our eyes locking, his smile immediate, familiar, disarming. "Look at you," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt too long, too natural. "You haven't changed a bit." That was a lie. I had changed. I was quieter now, worn down. The bright, sharp edges of my youth softened into dull outlines of someone still pretending. We spent most of the evening catching up, our conversation flowing easily, laughter slipping into the spaces between words. It felt good. Too good. He noticed everything, how I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, how I reached for the wine glass when something struck a nerve. My husband never noticed things like that. Dinner passed, people drifted in and out, and the night eventually settled. Most had gone to bed or returned to their hotels, but Daniel and I stayed up, sitting near the fireplace with only a dim lamp between us. He was telling me a story from his last hiking trip when he stopped mid-sentence and said, "You seem different." I looked at him. Different how? Like you've forgotten how to smile with your eyes. The silence that followed was heavy. I stared into the wine glass in my hand, wishing I hadn't heard him, wishing he wasn't right. "It's marriage," I said finally, attempting a joke. "It does that to people." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned in just slightly, not close enough to be inappropriate, but enough to make my breath catch. "You deserve to feel seen, you know?" My throat tightened. I wanted to respond, say something clever or brush it off, but the truth was, I couldn't remember the last time someone said something like that to me. Before I could speak, our mother called out from the hallway, breaking the moment. I stood too quickly, murmuring something about heading to bed. As I walked to the guest room, I could still feel his eyes on me. Not predatory, not possessive, just aware, present. It was the first time in years I felt noticed. The next morning, I found him outside on the porch, barefoot, sipping coffee like he owned the sunrise. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Something like that," I said, wrapping the cardigan tighter around myself. The air was cool, the kind of early morning chill that made everything feel a little more real. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. I hesitated only a moment before sitting. We didn't speak right away. There was no need to. A quiet understanding filled the space between us, both of us aware, neither willing to name it. The birds chirped. The world turned. And something between us began to stir again, slowly and without permission. "You still write?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Not really," I answered. "It's been a while." "Why'd you stop?" I stared out at the trees. Life. Marriage. Distractions. I don't know. Everything just started feeling quieter. Or maybe you stopped being heard. His words weren't a stab, but they cut clean. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth of it was already sitting between us, louder than any confession I could have made. Later that day, the family scattered for various errands and activities. Somehow, Daniel and I ended up alone again. We went for a walk along the old path near the woods behind the house, the one we used to race down when we were kids. The leaves crunched beneath our shoes, and the sun filtered through the trees like gold dust. He brushed a twig from my hair without asking, fingers grazing my temple longer than necessary. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, then lied. "Yeah." He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "You don't have to pretend around me. I know what that look means." "What look?" "That one," he said. "The one where you're trying not to fall apart because you're scared no one will help you pick up the pieces." Something in me wavered. I looked away, afraid he'd see too much if I held his gaze any longer. "I'm married," I said softly, as if saying it aloud would remind us both of the line neither of us had the right to cross. "I know," he replied, voice low. "I'm not asking for anything." But he was. Not with words, his eyes said enough. Back at the house, we moved through the evening like nothing had changed. But it had. The way he handed me a plate, the way our fingers brushed, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Every glance, every silence, was thick with meaning. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I passed him in the hallway. Neither of us said a word, but we both paused. Just for a second too long. Long enough to know the spark had turned into something we wouldn't be able to ignore much longer. Thick clouds rolled in like a warning, and the air grew heavy, charged. By the time the rain began, most of the house was asleep. I stood by the window in the guest room, watching the drops blur the glass, heart pounding louder than the thunder outside. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, barefoot again, hair damp from the porch. His shirt clung to his chest, and his eyes held that same calm intensity one was beginning to fear. "The power's out," he said. "Thought you might want some company." I should have said no. I should have shut the door. Instead, I stepped aside. We sat on the edge of the bed, a candle flickering on the nightstand between us. Shadows danced across his face, and I found myself watching the way his jaw tensed when he swallowed, the way his eyes searched mine like they were reading every word I didn't say. "I couldn't sleep," I whispered. "Neither could I." There was a long pause. The air buzzed with something unspoken, magnetic. "I've tried to stop thinking about you," he said suddenly, voice barely audible over the rain. "But every time I'm around you, it's like the rest of the world disappears." I looked at him, really looked. The boy I grew up with was gone. In his place stood a man who saw me, not as someone's wife, not as someone fading quietly into a life she didn't choose, but as someone worth seeing. "I don't know who I am anymore," I confessed. "I feel like I've disappeared into this version of me I don't even recognize." Daniel reached out, fingers brushing mine. "Then let's find her again. Just for tonight." It was reckless. It was wrong. It was inevitable. I kissed him first. It wasn't soft or tentative, it was desperate. A crash of emotion, years of silence breaking all at once. He pulled me closer, hands trembling against my skin, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment. We didn't speak after that. Words would have only complicated the honesty of what our bodies already knew. Later, I lay there beside him, the storm still raging outside, and I felt awake. Not in the physical sense, but something deeper. I was aware of every breath, every heartbeat. I wasn't thinking of consequences. I wasn't thinking of my husband. I was just there, present, alive, seen. Daniel traced a line along my shoulder, his voice a whisper in the dark. "I'll never forget this." I didn't answer, because I knew I wouldn't forget either. But even then, I also knew we could never go back from here. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness, so complete it felt sacred. The room was bathed in soft gray light, and for a moment, I could pretend the world had stopped spinning, just long enough for me to stay in that bed beside him. Daniel was still asleep, one arm draped loosely across my waist. His breathing was steady, peaceful. I studied the curve of his jaw, the way his lips barely parted. There was something painfully tender about watching him like that, knowing what we'd done. Knowing it could never happen again. I slipped out of bed without waking him. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair was tousled, lips slightly swollen, eyes wide with both fear and something dangerously close to joy. She looked alive. But reality waited like a shadow at the door. By the time I made it to the kitchen, my mother was humming and making coffee, completely unaware of the earthquake that had just shaken the foundation of her home. I moved through the motions, small talk, quiet nods, a forced smile, while my heart thudded with the weight of a secret too large to contain. Daniel joined us an hour later, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at me directly, but I felt him in the room like gravity. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. When it came time to leave, he walked me to my car. We stood by the driver's door, a silence stretching between us like a thread pulled too tight. I know we can't go back, he said quietly. And I'm not asking you to. But I want you to remember something. I looked at him, already feeling the ache of goodbye. You deserve more than silence, he said. More than being invisible. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you for seeing me. He leaned in, pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, gentle, final. And then I drove away. My husband didn't ask questions when I returned. He barely looked up from his laptop. It was as if I'd never left. As if I hadn't just done something that changed everything inside me. But something had shifted. I started journaling again, going for walks. I booked a therapy session. I stopped waiting for him to notice me and started noticing myself instead. I never spoke to Daniel again. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that moment wasn't meant to last. It wasn't a beginning. It was a wake-up call. And sometimes that's all a person really needs. Just one night. One person. One moment you'll never forget.